This is American Dreams, a program where we interview thought leaders and entrepreneurs and bring their ideas to you in real-world context. Welcome to today's show. I'm visiting here today with Meredith Bushnell. Meredith, good to have you with us.
Hi, Alan. Thank you for having me.
So Meredith is a leading estate planning attorney located in the San Francisco Bay Area, but I'm sure the practice extends well beyond the borders of California. And before we get into what's going on in that world today, Meredith, can you give your background of how you came to be where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So today I am a partner at Venable, which is a national law firm in San Francisco. And I am co-chair of our West Coast estate planning group. And I started actually over 20 years ago as a corporate and partnership tax lawyer. And I focused in that area for approximately 6 years. But when I went back to school to get my LLM in taxation, I really fell in love with the trust and estates and charitable planning parts of the tax law. And so as soon as I had an opportunity to transition, I did so. And I've been focusing on wealth transfer planning and planning for all of the other things that go along with being wealthy for, over 15 years now.
And well, I've had personal experience of working on mutual clients with Meredith, and I can attest to the fact that you're excellent in terms of that, the field of estate gift planning, and I appreciate all that you bring to the client service. So, Meredith, in the world of estate and gift tax, there's much going on, but let's start with a discussion on infrastructure bill and what that's all about and how we need to pay attention.
Okay, great. Yeah, so Biden came in this year with two big policy programs. One is the traditional infrastructure plan, which is known as the American Jobs Plan, and the other is a human infrastructure plan, and that's known as the American Families Plan. The price tag for the plans, as Biden has conceived them, is extraordinarily high. The infrastructure plan is, as Biden conceived it, was going to cost about $1.67 trillion and was to be paid for in part by raising the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. The human infrastructure, the American Families Plan, is focused primarily on education, paid leave, assisting families, and the price tag for that, as originally conceived, was $721 billion. And that plan was conceived of to be paid for by tax increases on the wealthy. And when we think about the wealthy, in Biden's mind, anyone earning over $400,000 a year is wealthy. And that goes back to a campaign promise he made, which was that he would not raise taxes on households earning less than $400,000. So that $400,000 you'll see play out in many of the proposed tax increases included in the American Families Plan. What's interesting, though, in watching the infrastructure plan, that is further along than the Families Plan. And as we see in the news almost every day now, that plan is evolving from where Biden started. The problem that Biden is facing is that the Democratic Party has a very progressive wing and a more conservative wing. And even within his own party, there's not agreement on what should be enacted and how it should be paid for. So initially, there were two approaches on the table for the infrastructure bill, even though both parties agree that infrastructure is important and a policy priority. So initially, there was a thought that the Democrats acting alone could get some of this done through budget reconciliation. However, that just has become tricky because it would require enough spending to satisfy the progressives and not too much for the more conservative Democrats. And so what we've seen evolve this month is this bipartisan approach with the 10 senators that it was just announced today that they think they've reached a framework of a deal with the White House yesterday. So that's the latest breaking news on the infrastructure. And it does fall short of Biden's initial vision as outlined in the American Jobs Plan. It's much more narrowly focused on physical infrastructure, and it's not going to include as many of the climate initiatives that the progressive wing of the party wants. So hopefully that will come to fruition. And it sounds like it's not going to include that large tax increase on corporations. So that's where we are on infrastructure.
It's interesting, and it seems like every day it's like a moving river flowing and ebb and tides, and one of the things that there's two things looking at. One is an income tax, the other is an estate and gift tax. So how would you advise clients today of, is there anything that they should be doing?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And that leads into the American Families Plan. And I think what we learn by looking at the infrastructure bill is that what is in the Green Book, what's in Biden's budget proposal, is not likely to be enacted as proposed. Right. And so as we look at what's going to happen when they move to address the human infrastructure bill, the American Families Plan, I think it's important to talk about what was in the Green Book, with the understanding that that is very likely not what's going to be enacted. And as we've seen this compromise process with the traditional infrastructure bill, we are going to see something similar with the human infrastructure bill, the American Families Plan. And we're also going to see the same tension play out between the Democratic Party. And I think that they're going to have Republicans on board, which means that what was in the Green Book is really probably going to get tapered back. So would it be helpful to go through the proposals in the Green Book?
Sure. Yeah. Let's talk about that. And also more concerning of, I've heard some enactment dates going all the way back to April retroactive. Then I hear other things of, well, let's just wait until next year to play along this act. So maybe kind of help us understand these two dates.
Yeah, those are really important topics. So the plan includes a proposed increase or a rollback to the pre-2017 Tax Act income tax rates, right? So we'd go back to a 39.6% TAP bracket. That would be effective in 2022, and it would apply to income over 450 to 700,000 for single filers, and slightly more for heads of household and joint filers. It would increase the capital gains rate to 39.6 for taxpayers with over $1 million in income, effective as of April 28th, 2021. So that is the one retroactive piece of the proposal. And the thought process being there, right, is that rate they wanted to lock in so that they wouldn't affect people's behavior in terms of decisions to sell, or if people knew that that date was going to be prospective, everyone would be rushing to sell assets before it took effect. And Alan, I'm sure you're getting a ton of questions from clients on this particular issue.
Well, I think it's not questions; it's more panicking. Tell us what to do, and even coming through the door, people are kind of like, there becomes a certain period of time when it's okay to pay some tax, and then when the tax rate gets too high, it completely changes behavior.
Right. Well, and think about the people who have transactions or deals pending right now, right? That started them and priced them based on an understanding of the tax rate that may not apply, right? If this retroactivity goes through, which changed the economics, right? So the tandem piece of that proposal, which does not go into effect until 2022, is the repeal of the basis step up. And this is really critical from an estate planning perspective. And this is probably the biggest estate planning piece of the proposed legislation. And under this proposal, we've always enjoyed historically a basis step up on death in appreciated assets. And we've also enjoyed the ability to gift assets without recognizing any gain on that gift. Well, this law would tax all appreciation in assets that are transferred by gift during your lifetime or at death, to the extent that the appreciation exceeds $1 million combined. So it's a similar concept to the transfer tax exclusion, but it would apply to this deemed sale, the deemed gain on gift, and it would only be $1 million per person. This is massive.
What about the people that are saying, well, I'd already set up a big charitable component, so I'm going to give all my appreciated assets into a foundation or into the charities of my choice. Can they still do that and have that in place?
They can. That is one of the exclusions. So the exclusions to the gain provision are gifts to spouses and gifts to charity. There's also a $250,000 exclusion on a transfer of a primary residence. So similar to what we see now under current law when you sell a residence, it's that same concept. And then finally, you're still going to be allowed to exclude the gain on QSBS. So the 1202 qualified small business stock exclusions will continue to apply, at least under the proposal in the Green Book.
Now, another thing that is very common out there when we go into 1202 is there was a little bit of, I'll call it a loophole or an oversight to where the parents could set up trusts on behalf of their children and transfer assets into these trusts, and then double down on the $10 million exemption. Part of the proposal, and this is the question of they had started to eliminate some of these estate planning techniques. Going back to the 1202 to the children gift, is that still valid? Is it still a valid?
Yeah, and so that is not in extreme detail in the Green Book, but there is nothing specifically addressing that in the Green Book. But Alan, that's a great point. I mean, what we see in the Green Book is much narrower, actually, from an estate planning standpoint than what we had seen in the Sanders proposal earlier this year and in the Van Hollen bill that was proposed earlier this year. So the Green Book is actually much narrower on the estate planning changes. And so the biggest proposed change is this capital gains triggering on a gift or at death. And again, this is one, though, where we're going to see some issues in the Democratic Party over this, because we're seeing senators from more rural areas push back on this because it will impact family farms and small businesses. And what the Green Book included to try to alleviate that was that they could pay the taxes on these gains over a 15-year period. But we're already hearing from some senators, including Senator Tester from Montana, that that's just not going to be enough to make it palatable for him and his farming constituents. So again, this is something that's going to play out. But, to your initial question, or what are we doing from an estate planning perspective? I would say there is going to be some plan that's going to be enacted, and it is going to have to be paid for somehow, right? We know that. We know what Biden has proposed. And, I think what ultimately is passed will be a scaled back version of that. But if you have clients that were planning on or are interested in making gifts of capital assets that have appreciation or of appreciated assets, they should absolutely do that sooner rather than later. I mean, just taking, for example, the fact that if they make a gift this year, there would be no appreciation, no recognition of gain on that appreciation at the time of the gift, versus under this proposal, if they do it next year, they're going to have to be paying tax when they make that gift on this appreciation. And what's important also to remember is that we still have an $11.7 million exclusion amount from transfer tax. And that is going to automatically go down at the end of 2025. The current Green Book proposal does not reduce that sooner, but as the family's plan goes through this legislative bargaining process, that could come back onto the table. In other words, they could bring back as a, in horse trading, they could bring back the concept that they would reduce that $11.7 million exemption amount sooner than 12/31/25.
This is excellent advice. And we've covered quite a bit of ground here, but I think the most important thing with today's message, Meredith, is how do people reach out to you for more information?
People can feel free to email me, mrbushnell, Bushnell, at Venable.com, Venable.com, or they can give me a call at 415-343-3224.
And again, I like to give that testimonial having worked with Meredith. I'm most appreciative for you coming on today and sharing this insight.